When outrageous claims like the resurrection of Jesus Christ are made, we look for proof. We need proof, especially when there's as big of a claim as what Easter morning is all about: the resurrection of Jesus Christ and the salvation of the world. My grandfather was a fisherman and a kidder of sorts, a fun man who always bought us way too much candy. You kids might be able to relate to that this morning. A man who wanted to see joy in our faces and loved to share with us the world, doing so many times through example and story. And sometimes he reminded me of the grandpa on The Simpsons, sharing outrageous stories like the flying hellfish, stories that seemed completely unbelievable. There was one time that we were out in the garage at his house, and he was out there tinkering with some fishing rods. We had no idea what he was doing, but my brother and I decided to go check it out. We'd probably given him some guff, saying something like, "You're never going to catch anything with that lure," or something like that. And he retorted, looking down at our young faces and smiling a jester-like smile, "I don't even need a fishing pole or a hook. I can use my hands." My brother Adam and I laughed, ran out of the big garage door, and played out in the yard, thinking nothing of it. Later that day, we had our big Sunday dinner, and we were sitting like we usually did in the living room afterwards. Grandpa was in his normal spot, like Sheldon, and he leaned over to me and Adam, and with a Tom Sawyer-like smile said, "You didn't believe me, did you? You don't think old Grandpa can really catch a fish with his bare hands?" I scoffed in shock that he was still playing this little game. "Of course not," I said. "That's impossible." He looked at my younger brother to see if he believed him, but he'd followed my lead and didn't. We looked around the room to see what everybody else thought about this outrageous claim of catching fish with his bare hands. My parents said that they didn't know, but that he looked pretty serious. So we looked at Grandpa's wife, figuring she wouldn't lie to us. And she said, "That's what he's always told me. I don't have any reason to not believe him." Well, we still didn't. That smirk on his face, like it was too good to be true, made us doubt. And for a couple of years, every once in a while, he'd say something about it, catching fish with his bare hands. My brother and I convinced at this point that he was full of it. And then one day, out of the blue, a fall day when the salmon are running in Michigan, where my grandparents' house is, Grandpa said, "How about I show you boys how to catch fish with your hands?" My brother and I were shocked that he was taking this outrageous claim this far. We got in the car, and Grandpa drove us to his friend's property about 5 minutes away. Beaver Creek ran through it, a piece of farmland with some woods. True slice of heaven on earth. We got out of the car, again confounded that we hadn't just gone to the candy store or something. Grandpa went inside, greeted his friend, who didn't come out at this time, but said that it was no problem, that we were there. And so Grandpa, Adam, and I walked through the woods towards the creek. No fishing poles, no spears, no nets in our hands. The fall leaves were bright yellow and red. The ground crunched with old brown leaves under our feet. Grandpa picked up a big stick and said he'd need this. "Oh, so now you're going to use a stick, huh, Grandpa?" Us still trying to figure out how this whole catching fish with his hands claim wasn't downright ridiculous. "You'll see," Grandpa said. "You'll see that Grandpa's still got a good few tricks up his sleeves today." Adam and I looked at each other like he was downright crazy as he stepped out onto the large root that stuck out in the water flowing down the stream. He reached down into the dark water where the water was swirling. He looked at us, smiled a huge smile, and said, The trick is to tickle their belly. They love it. That's why they hide in these holes." And then slowly, and he said the words slowly, you move your fingers up into their gills and you pull them out of the water. As he said this, the 70-year-old man stood up, dragging with him a salmon that was at least 4 feet long. What? I can't believe it. How did you do that? No way. And a whole other list of exclamations came from our mouths. We didn't believe you, Grandpa. Sorry that we didn't believe you. Even Grandma said that it was true. Don't worry, boys. It's a fishing story that most people don't believe, but it's true. I've been doing it like this since before I was your age, and was probably 10 the first time I was able to do it. Grandpa asked for the stick. The fish stopped kicking quickly, and he stuck the stick in the gills of the salmon. One end of the stick on my shoulder, one end on my brother's. We walked out of the woods and up to the house of my grandpa's friend with the tail of the fish dragging in the dirt. Grandpa's friend meeting us and saying to my grandfather, "They didn't believe you, huh? Looks like they're convinced now." And boy, were we. We didn't stop talking about it all day. That piece of salmon that we ate that night for Sunday dinner, it was as fishy as could be to us kids, but we ate it with pride, as we too now shared that same story with Grandpa about how it was indeed true that you can catch fish with just your bare hands. As we sat there and ate the fish, we knew that when we were going to go home and tell our friends about this experience, that they too would have their doubts. But boy, were we excited as ever to tell them. We knew it was true, whether or not they did. God willing, maybe one day they'd learn the truth too. Like Grandpa Wally, Jesus makes some pretty wild claims throughout the gospel. Crazy, big claims that make catching fish by hand seem simple. Jesus says things such as when he claimed that he was going to change the world, flipping it upside down, saying, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." You know, not even all those who heard it come out of Jesus' mouth believed this claim. They were gonna need to see some proof. Or what about when Jesus made the outrageous claim that he was able to forgive sins, saying, "Friend, your sins are forgiven you"? Or when he said such crazy things as, "Blessed are the poor, the hungry, and those who weep," in the Beatitudes. We still have a hard time and struggle with these truths, don't we? I mean, we all want to be blessed, but we still don't want to be poor, hungry, and weeping. Or what about when he taught us, claiming this was the truth, that we are to love our enemies, to do good to those who hate us, bless those who curse us, and pray for those who abuse us, to turn our other cheek and give to anyone who begs from us? That just sounds like crazy talk. And this is my last one, but it's a biggie. Like when he told his disciples over and over again that he was going to die and resurrect from the dead. Not even his closest disciples believed that fishing story. People don't just come back from the dead. That's not a thing, Jesus. These are some big claims that come from Jesus' mouth. These are claims that are going to require proof. Because in our human nature, none of this makes any sense at all. It's going to take some proof like no other to get us to believe in this stuff. But, and this is the biggest but ever, that is exactly what we get today. Undeniable proof. Jesus' most outrageous and unbelievable claims are proven when he indeed resurrects. And if this greatest claim of all, that he made to come back from the dead, happens, then we can't help but realize along with it what the rest of the claims are too. They're true no matter how far-fetched they sound. On this Easter morning, like Grandpa Wally's, Jesus' credibility just became like gold. And now, thanks to it, we can actually go forth and live in this faith, trusting what Jesus has told us, 100% of it. Because you see, this whole resurrection surprise of Easter morning with Jesus rising up from the ground, this changes how we see this world completely. We can now live in the confidence of everything that Jesus ever said. Do you believe it? Is the proof enough for you, or does it sound a little too much like a good fishing story? I mean, these women that come from the tomb who witnessed it with their own eyes, and these disciples who devoted their whole lives to telling about the resurrection and the proof they saw, some of them were indeed fishermen by trade. You remember when Jesus told them another crazy thing? That he'd have them soon fishing for people? Well, that's exactly what they spent the rest of their lives doing. And their followers passing it along, like my brother and I, with the neighborhood kids, telling stories of the possibility of pulling giant fish up out of the water with your bare hands, fish so big that with a stick in its gills, the tail still drug in the dirt. You see, we get the end of the gospel today. But as the story begins and plays out, Jesus had been reeling them along, telling the fishermen what they figured was the greatest exaggerated fishing story ever told. But in the end, like the fish rising from the water in Grandpa's hand, Jesus rose from the dead, and this was indeed proof enough for them to share this story and to recite it for the rest of their lives, even if people at first might give them that look like they're crazy, like Adam and I did to Grandpa Wally way back when in the garage, when he started to make unbelievable claims. But truth be told, like Grandpa, these women at the tomb on Easter and the other disciples, they had the biggest true fishing story to ever tell. But they also had the biggest proof of it. They had seen it with their own surprised eyes. And there was going to be no keeping this story from being shared. For me, the storytellers, the fact that they exist, this is the proof. I mean, who shares this story? Who devotes their entire lives to it in the first place? If it's not a story that's worth sharing that much. They had a story that they were willing to share, even if some were going to get mocked or others be completely not believed for sharing it. And I don't think it's any coincidence that Jesus chose fishermen like Peter to be his disciples. Fishermen tend to be some pretty good storytellers. And boy, were they going to need that skill to tell the story of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. I'll ask you, do you know a storyteller who can keep you on the edge of your seat? Do you think that any of those stories they like to tell might indeed be true? And who was it that told you the whopper of a tale about Jesus Christ and his resurrection the first time? Because you know it. Sometimes the fishing story, the biggest, whopping, most unbelievable ones, they are indeed true. As a matter of fact, it's the best ones that are true. Happy Easter. Amen.